EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It's the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If you've got a question about Catholicism, why does the church believe this, but they don't understand, but they don't believe this? Why does the church teach certain things? Well, we've got the answers for you. All you have to do is give us a call. We're glad to help out. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. And, of course, you can always send us an email. The address for that, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson handles social media for us. If you want to ask a question on YouTube or Facebook, all you have to do is put your question in the comments box. Jeff will see that. He'll shoot it to us here in the studio, and hopefully we can answer your question on today's program. Again, the phone number, 833-288-EWTN. I'm Tom Price, along with, live from Siouxland Catholic Radio in Sioux City, Iowa, Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing very well. How are they treating you there in Sioux City?
Fantastic. Couldn't be better.
And tell us what takes you to Sioux City today.
Well, I'm going to speak tonight to the Catholic radio community of the greater Siouxland area. Everybody wants to come out, and we're going to talk about having a relationship with Jesus in the Catholic Church and the wonders of Catholic radio. Fantastic.
Well, we will be praying for your safe travels and hope everything goes well for you tonight. Here's an email to lead us off. This is from Dante, who says, Dr. Anders, how did St. Augustine assume that God has no emotion? Isn't sending Jesus Christ an example that God cares for his creations who disobeyed his will and all that?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. This is not an uncommon one. So the Catholic doctrine on God, and not just St. Augustine's doctrine, but the doctrine of all Catholic theologians and the dogma of the Church, is that when we talk about God, we're talking about the ultimate everything. This is the ultimate where the buck stops. There is nothing prior to God. And Catholic belief in God is not superstitious, and it's not based simply on revelation or scriptural revelation, but we're talking about the God who made the natural world and the God that can be discerned, if haltingly, by natural reason. And so early Christian thinkers recognized that the aspirations of the Greek and Roman philosophers to understand the nature of the universe and to align their lives therewith were apiece with the project of Christianity. Now, they think that, obviously, the revelation of Christ brought things that the philosophers did not know, things that they needed to know, but that Christianity wasn't somehow antagonistic to the natural knowledge of God or to the philosophical project or to the good of human reason, but was profoundly complementary to it. And so the God of the philosophers, the God that can be attained by human reason, is the same God that is revealed to us in sacred scripture and the incarnation of Christ. And so there are things we can rightly say about God, if God really is God, if God really is the source of everything, that from which all things proceed, that we can discern rationally. And one of them is that God can't change. God can't have parts. God has to be eternal. If God is subject to change, then that means there's something outside of God that has the capacity to change him. And therefore, God's not really ultimate. If God has parts, then there's something outside of God that is the principle of his composition. And so if God is the ultimate fact about the universe, the ultimate place where the buck stops, he has to be, we know this from philosophy, he has to be unchanging and metaphysically simple. And so the doctrine on God having no emotion follows really from his incorporality. Human emotion, as you well know today, we know better today than even Augustine did, is largely a function of our biology, of our neurology, of the various neurochemicals that run our human consciousness. None of those things are applicable to God. God doesn't have a brain. When God thinks, we speak about God thinking right in a way that's only analogous to human thought and far transcends it. So it's unlike anything that we know of as thinking and feeling and knowing, far superior, but of course utterly transcendent. So that's why the Catholic Church takes the position that it takes on God. And when we look at depictions of God in Scripture that suggest that God has emotion, God has wrath, God has anger, God has joy, God has sorrow, the Church has always held that this is a kind of accommodated language within the construct of a narrative to evoke a certain response on the part of the human reader, on the part of the auditor, but should be understood as a kind of condescension and not a literal description of God's inner nature or essence. Now, when it comes to the question of God's love, we're on a bit stronger footing here, right? Because love is not an emotion, right? I mean, anybody who's ever loved a child knows that you can, by loving a child, you might be angry one day and joyful one day and terrified another day and frustrated another day. A whole range of emotions is compatible with the one, shall we call it existential orientation, that is love. Love is this settled, unchanging disposition of the will to do good to another person and to seek union with them. And so we can talk about God being love, God acting out of love. This God is goodness itself. Goodness, by definition, is diffusive of itself. This orientation to transmit goodness to everyone without sullying God with the vicissitudes of human emotion.
Okay. Makes sense. And thank you, Dante, for your email. If you would like to send us an email for a future show, we'd love to get it. We'd love to deal with it right here on the radio. Our address for that, ctc@ewtn.com. ctc@ewtn.com. We try to answer at least one or two emails on each of our live programs. And then once a month or so, we'll dip into the mailbags, clean that thing out, and get a whole bunch of emails on the air. And sometimes we'll hold over the long emails to a show like that where we've got time to kind of stretch out a little bit and answer those emails as necessary. Again, the address, ctc@ewtn.com. Well, right now we're taking your phone calls at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Call to communion with Dr. David Anders there at Siouxland Catholic Radio in Sioux City, Iowa, right here on EWTN.
Pope Francis journeys to Marseille. EWTN will bring you complete coverage as the Holy Father encourages the faithful. September 22nd and 23rd here on EWTN TV.
This is Sandra McDevitt with a Did You Know moment. Did you know, after the War of 1914-18, soldiers brought over 2,000 handwritten letters to the Carmelite convent in Lisieux, France? St. Therese died in 1897, and by the beginning of the war, devotion to her had spread. Soldiers carried with them medals, relics, or holy pictures of the saint, seeking her intercession at their greatest hour of need. Flocking to her convent at Lisieux after the war, they brought letters of how Therese gave them protection, healed them, or even appeared to them. One even brought his Croix de Guerre, France's highest medal. The letters are archived in the convent at Lisieux. So now you know about the 2,000 letters brought to the convent at Lisieux, France. I'm Sandra McDevitt for EWTN Radio.
The Holy Father's prayer intention for the month of September is people living on the margins. We pray for those persons living on the margins of society in inhumane life conditions. May they not be overlooked by institutions and never considered of lesser importance.
Call to communion with Dr. David Anders, who is live at Siouxland Catholic Radio in Sioux City, Iowa today. We are here to take your calls at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question about the Catholic faith, perhaps you'd like to explain to us what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. That is the theme of this program. What is stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Again, our number 833-288-EWTN. EWTN. Let me tell you something wonderful we are offering for you. It's absolutely free, an EWTN online learning series. It's called In His Sandals. You can discover the beauty, truth, and goodness of the church with the EWTN online learning series, delve into the riches of the faith, grow closer to our Lord with free videos and study guides. And with this particular series, we invite you to be still and sit with the Lord through In His Sandals, our online video reflections with our own chaplain here at EWTN, Father Joseph Mary Wolf. Enroll in our courses today by going to learningseries.ewtn.com. Again, learningseries.ewtn.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Joe, a first-time caller from Minnesota, listening on iHeartRadio. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today, sir?
It's probably a pretty large question, but the question I have is, with the fall of the angels, Lucifer and those that followed him, would God have created humans, given the factor that due to the open positions where the angels used to sit, that, you know, like Mary sits in the place where Lucifer once was, would God have still created humans because of that?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, first of all, just a qualification, Mary does not occupy the role in heaven formerly occupied by Lucifer. Mary's status, cosmologically, if you will, is so much more elevated than that of Lucifer. There's absolutely no way to compare even the condition of the pre-fallen Lucifer. And why do I say that? Because only Mary, in all the universe of creatures, angelic, human, animal, mineral, vegetable, you name it, there's only one creature of whom can we say that she was the mother of God, the God-bearer. And so that is a dignity utterly unlike anything granted to any other creature. And therefore, Mary's status, I mean, we rightly venerate her as the Queen of Heaven. There's nothing like the Blessed Virgin Mary in eternity past or future, nothing like a creature who had the privilege of becoming the mother of God. So that totally different situation there. And then also related to the question of Mary, we can get into the real meat of your question, which is, did God make humans as plan B? You know, did God create the angelic hosts, and then that plan didn't work out, so he said, well, let's try something different, let's try humanity. And the position there is no, right? That God predetermined the incarnation of Christ as well as the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in an eternal decree that's not in view of the fall of the angels. Now, there was a debate in medieval theology about whether Christ would have become incarnate if humans had not sinned. And the Thomist, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Dominican school took the position that the purpose of the incarnation from God's point of view, as it were, was always and only as the remedy for human sin. But there was a school of thought in medieval theology with the Franciscan school that held that the good of the incarnation was so great that Christ would have become incarnate. We would have benefited from the incarnation even if there had been no human sin. Now, from my point of view today, the debate is a kind of meaningless one, and there's no way to resolve it. But it shows you where the mind of the church is on this, that the incarnation, for that matter, the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary is a good so great that God would have willed it, even if it weren't willed as a remedy for sin, as it were. It's an end in itself.
Okay. Is that helpful for you, Joe?
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for that answer. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. That opens up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Here's an email from Walter who says, Dr. Anders, in Genesis, God says, we shall create a mate for Adam. So does the Jewish Torah use we or I? Doesn't this scripture support the Trinity? What do our Jewish brothers say about this? Blessings, Walter.
Yeah, thanks. So, yes, it is a plural, and I think that you would be hard-pressed to say that this sort of definitively indicates the doctrine of the Trinity. There certainly have been commentators that want to find the Trinity obliquely mentioned in this text. There's no indications internal to the text that interpretation is required. I mean, obviously you could draw that, but you'd have to do it, after the fact. There's a number of different ways to handle it. I mean, one way to look at it, would be that this is something akin to the royal we. Right? That it's not really meant to indicate a plurality.
Okay. Very good. Appreciate that, Walter. Thanks so much for your question. Julie in Nebraska called, couldn't stay on the line, but she says, did God get tired? He rested on the seventh day,
Yeah, thanks. So the Catholic position on this is that God doesn't change, and that God doesn't have a body. And so there's nothing in God that could decay or fall apart or need to be revivified in any way. God is a spirit, and God is the ultimate source of the universe. He's the first principle. And so this is an accommodated language. This is a language that is appropriate in the narrative to make a particular theological point, which is about the Jewish celebration of the Sabbath. And so we're to imitate God, who is said to have created in 6 days. So that underscores the Jewish liturgical practice, but you shouldn't push it too far in terms of trying to discern something about the inner character of God himself.
Very good. Julie, thanks so much for checking in with us. Call to Communion here on EWTN. We do have a couple of lines open at the moment. Matt is furiously screening the calls, but we do have some lines open at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here's an email from Ricardo now. We have a son around the age of reason who is going to a Catholic school. He has already received his first Holy Communion, and we go to Mass every Saturday, the Vigil, or Sunday. My wife was once a Protestant, but has now converted to the Catholic faith. She is also going to a non-denominational church because of the, quote, feel-good environment. Plus, the way they have Bible studies for adults and kids is what she says. So is it beneficial for our son to go to this non-denominational church with my wife and become educated in their Sunday school Bible studies, even though he's already getting religious studies in his Catholic school? Seems to me like they would conflict with each other at some point. Also, this may confuse him on which faith to follow. Thanks, Ricardo.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. I really appreciate the question. So I can promise you that the formation that your son is getting in the Catholic Church is significantly different, is substantively different from the formation that he would get in the Protestant Church. There are real differences, and they will make a difference to his life and his spirituality. And so they are not intrinsically compatible. They're not.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean, as Catholics, that we think Protestants are bad people. We don't think Protestants are bad people. They can be saved. They can know Christ. They can live a life of grace. But it would be in spite of, not because of, the deficiencies in their theology. And let me give you an example. And this is a real substantive example. Most Protestants hold, virtually all Protestants believe, that you can be reconciled to God and go to heaven while essentially remaining in the state of mortal sin. That you could have a serious personal sin and enmity with God in your heart. But if you have faith alone in the atoning work of Christ, that God counts that, as it were, for righteousness, and you can go to heaven in spite of the content of your moral life. Now, does that mean that most Protestants live disordered moral lives? No, that doesn't mean that. And in fact, many of them, while believing that morality is not necessary, nonetheless live very moral lives, right? But it is a difficulty, right? It's an impediment. If you believe at some level, I don't actually need to reform my moral life, that's an impediment that could potentially keep you out of heaven. Not because you believe it, but if that leads you to be lackadaisical or careless about your moral life, that's going to be a big problem down the road. Here's another example. Many Protestant churches take a cavalier attitude towards divorce. And they say, well, you should never get divorced. But if you do, make sure the second one doesn't end in divorce. Oh, you got divorced twice. Well, three's the charm, buddy, And the Catholic Church, by contrast, says you can't get divorced You cannot sever a valid marriage ever until death do us part, because that's what Jesus Christ said. And I could sort of go down the list and keep adding things that make a real difference. So he'll have that to confuse him. Now, what your wife says about the feel-good thing is real, right? And there are a lot of Protestant churches that invest an awful lot of time and resource and personnel into creating an environment that's pleasant to be involved in. And look, there is nothing wrong with having a pleasant environment in your religious life, particularly if that pleasantness comes in the form of real human relationships. Mm-hmm. And this is a problem it's not a problem for Protestants, this is a problem for the Catholic Church that doesn't have a culture of, necessarily always, of cultivating a good sense of community in parishes. So unfortunately, I know many situations myself, I'm sure you do, of people that go to their parish, they go to Mass, and they go home, and that's kind of it, and they don't really feel connected to the life of their parish or their priest or other Catholics, and they may not feel personally moved. They go out of a kind of sense of duty, mm-hmm. and that's not good. Like, the parishes should change that. They should have better pastoral outreach to their people. But the fact of the matter is that many people in your son's situation who are in maybe a pastoral situation in their local parish that maybe is suboptimal, can be wooed, can be drawn in by what seems to be a vibrant, active community of Protestants. And the next thing you know, you don't have a Catholic boy going to a Protestant church. You have an ex-Catholic.
Yeah. Well, Ricardo, thank you so much for your email. We do appreciate that. Let's go back to the phones now and talk with Monica in Colorado, listening on the Great Catholic Radio Network. Hello, Monica. What's on your mind today?
Hello. Thank you so much for taking my call. Yes, I was talking with my stepdaughter, and she's really struggling with the fact that her sister-in-law is a lesbian. And she says that she's really struggling with why wouldn't God let her be with a woman. And so I told her, well, because it's God's natural law for one man, one woman to, go forth and multiply, once they're married. And she said, okay, well, what about if a man and woman get married, one of them is infertile and they can't have children? So why can't her sister-in-law be married to a woman? They can't have
thanks.
children.
I really appreciate the question. So it's really helpful. We're talking about natural law here, so we're not just limiting this discussion to the contours of the Catholic faith. We're going to look at human civilization and the human person and ask ourselves the question, why does every civilization known to mankind, with maybe one or two very rare exceptions, why does almost every civilization in history, every culture in history, Catholic or not, Christian or not, have something analogous to the Catholic institution of marriage? Why is it that they all have some kind of union between a man and a woman that creates legal bonds, kinship bonds, obligations, to offspring, laws of inheritance, these kinds of things? Why does every civilization do that? And there are all other kinds of human coupling, ways of pairing off that civilizations don't hallow in this way. Let's take an example. Like Simon and Garfunkel, for example. Now there was a pair for you right there. I mean, what a pair. They made wonderful music together. How about a tennis doubles team? Maybe you've got a lifetime duo of excellent tennis players, and they've done everything together and they've, gone to the highest levels. Why doesn't society say, yeah, those relationships are so great, let's create a legal institution and a social institution where we celebrate that union and ascribe all of these kinds of rights and privileges to it? Why is it always the man and the woman? Well, if you think about it, it's not too hard to come up with a reason. It's for the blindingly obvious reason that when men and women get involved in this kind of union, then babies tend to happen, right? And because babies come into the world, they come into the world needy, and they're really important for the replenishment of society and civilization. You can't just pump them out. You have to raise them. You have to nurture them in a particular kind of environment. You have to educate them and socialize them. And there are people who are sort of tailor-made to do the job. They're biologically oriented to do the job, and those are the people that brought the child into the world, namely the parents. And so what the social institution of marriage has always done through every civilization is simply acknowledge, doesn't construct a reality, it simply acknowledges a reality that's already there. And I think this is so easy to see when you look at, we're talking about homosexuality here, when you look at how homosexuality has been lived out in societies that approved of it before the modern era. And I'm thinking in particular of the ancient Greek culture, the culture of Plato and Aristotle and so forth.
Yeah.
And if you've ever read Plato's dialogues, he's fairly positive towards homosexual relationships and pederasty in particular. And they write about it all the time. But something the ancient Greeks never thought to do, never crossed their mind, was to call that kind of union marriage. They knew what marriage was. Marriage was for having babies and replenishing society. This was another thing altogether. Now, I've gotten to the break. I've run out of time. I want to talk about why that can't be applied to other kinds of coupling after the break.
Monica, sit tight. We'll continue on the other side. We'll also talk with Bill in Washington, Thomas in Maryland. Calls open for you at 833-288-EWTN.
Hi friends, Janet Williams here. Join me every Wednesday on Women of Grace Live as I welcome New Age researcher and blogger for Women of Grace, Sue Brinkman. Sue and I will be talking about all the wacky things that could distract you from your faith. Psychics, yoga, Reiki, crystals, acupuncture, Ouija boards, tarot cards, and astral traveling are just a few of the stranger things we discuss. That's why we call it Wacky Wednesday. So join us every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
This is a Pro-Life Minute with doctors Stephen and Gracie Christie.
Steve, here's a really ugly accusation that's leveled at us all the time. You pro-lifers only care about babies while they're inside the uterus. Once they're born, you don't care for the poor and needy.
And what I always say is, what makes you think that pro-life advocates care less for the needy than pro-choicers? Did you know that pro-lifers give a greater percentage of their income and volunteer more of their time to the needy than those who identify as pro-choice? Now, you might believe that progressive social policies are better for the poor than conservative policies, and that's a legitimate debate to have. But it's both arrogant and inaccurate to simply claim that pro-choicers who donate less of their time and less of their money to the poor somehow care more for the poor than do the pro-life community.
Adoption rates also refute this falsehood. Pro-lifers are more than twice as likely to adopt as pro-choicers, again proving that pro-life movement is pro-life for all children. So claiming that pro-life advocates don't care about babies after they're born is pure nonsense.
Your favorite EWTN radio programs are all over social media: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, SoundCloud, and they're available right now, on demand, day or night. Remember, EWTN is everywhere.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Join us later today on Catholic Answers Live as we do our best to explain and defend the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Live, 6 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Glad you're with us for the Monday edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. He is live to you from Sioux City, Iowa, in the studios of Siouxland Catholic Radio. We do have a couple lines open for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Before the break, David was answering the question from Monica regarding her stepdaughter's sister-in-law is a lesbian. She says, how do I explain to her why she can't be married and why infertile people can be married? David?
Yeah, thanks. So I won't go through the whole... sorry about that. I won't go through the whole resume again, but before the break I explained throughout history and culture, every civilization has something akin to marriage because of the obvious reason that when men and women get together in intimate union, babies tend to happen, and they need a particular environment of nurture that's best served by those who brought the child into existence, and therefore they have an interest in being invested in one another and committed to one another as the parents to create that kind of social environment, that particular community that's unique to the raising of children. And in societies like the ancient Greeks, for example, that even valued homosexuality, it never occurred to them to say gay coupling or homosexual coupling is the same thing as the male-female union because of the obvious reason that it's intrinsically infertile. All right, so the question then would be, if that's the rationale for marriage, and look, in the modern world, we didn't lose that sense of marriage really until the Romantic movement and this glorification of romance that began to suggest, well, the real purpose of marriage is to cultivate and extend and deepen these feelings of romantic attraction that couples have for one another. And since those are intrinsically fleeting, that necessitated no-fault divorce. Because if that's what you're after, well, then marriage only endures as long as those feelings endure, and children are kind of an afterthought. But in any event, the answer to the question about the infertile couple is, first of all, most people don't know that they're infertile when they go into marriage, right? And many people have been told, well, you're never going to have kids, and then half those people are parents today, right? I mean, we've all heard those kinds of stories.
Sure.
But even if they were genuinely infertile, the union of a man and a woman, a lifelong commitment to one another, to at least attempt a family through some form of sexual cooperation, is the kind of relationship that is always naturally fulfilled in bearing children. And maybe it won't be fulfilled in that way, but it's that kind of relationship.
Right.
Whereas, if I'm really attached to my tennis partner, that is a relationship that is never naturally fulfilled in the bearing of children. It's fulfilled in winning tennis tournaments.
Sure.
Right? And so even in the case of an infertile couple, you still have the kind of people, the kind of thing that potentially creates the kind of society in which children naturally are raised. And that's why, children deserve to have a mother and a father. And it would be best, for example, in the case of adoption, to place an adopted child in the kind of environment where they could have a mother and a father.
Yeah. There you go. Monica, is that helpful for you?
Yes, very, very helpful. Thank you, Dr. David Anders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And by the way, if you would like to play that program or that little question answered there from Dr. David Anders, you can check out the podcast. Charles will have that posted for you in a couple of hours here. Just go to EWTN.com/radio, click on the word podcast, and you'll find Call to Communion right there at the top of the page. Do check that out, and thanks again for your call. Let's go now to John in Portland, Oregon, listening on the great Modern Day Radio. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, what's on my mind is I'm a year and a half into being Catholic. I'm in my 50s. I was on the Protestant side for quite some time, and this individual actually came to my Easter evening, coming into the Catholic Church. But I kind of grew up with, or not grew up, but youth group and on with a lot of Baptists and Protestants. And I met with them, a group of old friends, and I can't believe I got this, and I don't know how to handle it. But old friends that said, well, we'd see you more if you came to church with us. And I'm like, I don't believe the Baptist stuff anymore. And I'm like, I mean, it's just like, how do I handle that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, you're not alone, obviously, and many converts to Catholicism have had these experiences. When I joined the Catholic Church, I lost friends by joining the Catholic faith, and I'm sure you know this, like having been a Protestant before. There's a real emphasis on proselytizing in a lot of Protestant communities, in a sense that, like, I'm not a good friend to you if I don't do everything in my power to coerce you into making an act of faith in my religion. And it's, there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that there's a tendency in Protestantism in general to disregard natural goods and to think that the only goods are supernatural goods. And so I can really tolerate, if I'm a Protestant, at least this is how I used to feel as a Protestant, even some level of natural injustice, if at the end of that, the result is that I could coerce a person into becoming becoming Protestant or making an act of faith in Christ or something. But as a Catholic, I look at a human being now, and this is what the Church has taught me. And yes, I'm concerned about their spiritual welfare, but I'm concerned about their integral good, right? I want to make sure that everything about them is healthy. Their relationships are healthy. Their mind is healthy. Their body is healthy. And also, the Church doesn't draw a line in the sand and say all the people on this side of the line are saved and all people on this side are lost. We don't actually know those kinds of questions, and we recognize that there's a legitimate development morally and spiritually that takes place throughout a person's life, and it's really up to God to judge the situation of a person's soul. So my job in relationship is literally just to be a good friend to you. Not to coerce you into something, not to try to take away your freedom or your rationality or your individuality, but to accompany you, to help you be the best version of you that you can be by me loving you. And I don't prejudice that by saying that can only happen if you do what I say and become Catholic like I am under these circumstances.
Yeah.
But that's a unique insight of the Catholic doctrine of the human person. Many Protestants don't share that way of looking at reality. They really do think that the ultimate and only good that you should aim at is conversion, and that everything else is kind of secondary to that. And that's unfortunate, but it's one of the reasons I became Catholic, because I woke up one day and realized that my Protestantism was making me a bad person, right? Because it made me tolerate behaviors in myself that I wouldn't have tolerated in any other realm of moral endeavor. You know, I wouldn't push my political opinions or my, favorite sports team or my musical preferences or anything like that on another person, make it a kind of condition of friendship. But I saw myself doing that in the area of religion, that I was sort of browbeating and intransigent and intolerant and sometimes even unkind and deceptive and manipulative in the interests of proselytizing. And I realized this is making me a bad person. And the Catholic faith I saw didn't do that.
John, is that helpful for you?
Oh, incredible. I didn't know where to go with this without getting angry. So thank you very much.
Now you know. John, thanks so much for your call. Here is Bill, a first-time caller from Washington, listening on the great Sacred Heart Radio. Bill, what's on your mind today, sir?
Oh, hi there. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I've got some end-of-life questions, Doctor, about I married an Episcopalian gal, and she converted to Catholic when she married me, and we inherited some property way up in Alaska. And the question is, there's been they've cremated their grandparents and her mother that's passed away, and they spread her mother's ashes, and they intend to spread her grandparents' ashes. And by the way, when I got up there and saw the box with those ashes, I put a crucifix on it, sprayed it with holy water. What I'm asking you is, are we allowed to partake in that ash spreading as Catholics? First question. And second of all, when they bury me up there, they have a little graveyard area, but I don't know if it's been blessed as a Catholic graveyard. Can I still be put in the ground there?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, see, the Church's position is based on the doctrine of the Incarnation and the resurrection. St. Paul says that when Christ comes back, that we will be like him, right? That our bodies will be raised even as his body was raised. And that right now, our bodies are members of Christ through baptism. And so there is something sacred about the human body. It's one of the reasons why Catholics venerate the relics of the saints. And venerating relics is very different from cremating the remains. It's placing them in a position of honor to be remembered as tokens, as it were, of Christ's very own body. And so we treat the body with incredible dignity, and the burial rites reflect that. And so for a long time, the Church said cremation is not allowed. Now the Church has changed its position, and it says you can cremate under certain circumstances, but never for a superstitious reason. So, what would a superstitious reason be? Well, many people cremate because, say, they believe in reincarnation. And so they think that the body is ultimately nothing, and that all that matters is this immaterial soul that, as it seems to pass, as it were, from one body to another. So, the body is just like changing trains in the subway. And so if you're motivated by that kind of consideration, the Church says that would be a superstitious motive for cremation, and that would not be allowed to a Catholic. But for many people, a traditional burial is quite expensive. They would like to be buried on consecrated ground, maybe near their parish. And so, you might have a columbarium at the church where you can repose the cremated ashes. And that's acceptable, right? But not this scattering to the winds business, which usually is something along the lines of, well, Granddaddy would like his spirit to, rest on the redwoods in California, and he wants to go be a redwood or something. And we're not going to go be redwoods. No, we're not doing that. In terms of can you be buried on family property, the answer to the question is yes. But I would hope that you would have all of the funeral rites that are the right of a Catholic. You want to have the Mass and the various funeral rites with the Church.
Okay. Appreciate your call, Bill. Thanks so much for it. It's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Hey, if you're up early Monday through Friday, perhaps you're getting off to work early, or whatever reason, we invite you to join us for the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. We bring you that every weekday at 5 a.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio. Back to the phones now for Thomas in Maryland, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Thomas, what's on your mind today, sir?
Hi, thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
It's about Gospel of John 8:8, where the Pharisees keep testing Jesus and asking him questions, and then he bends down and writes on the ground with his finger. And every time I read it, it just like sticks out at me, and I was just wondering why he would do something so odd as that. If you have any insight on that.
Yeah, sure. So this is a passage that has elicited a lot of commentary in the Catholic tradition. Augustine had a lot to say about it. Thomas Aquinas had a lot to say about it. And they proposed all kinds of reasons that Jesus wrote on the ground, all kinds of possibilities. So, when Christ said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," some thought that that's what he wrote on the ground. Others have suggested that he wrote the sins of those who were accusing the woman caught in adultery. Thomas even goes so far as to suggest that Christ's bending down was to indicate the mystery of the incarnation. Augustine said that he wrote on the ground because his accusers would be written in the ground, whereas the saints would be written in heaven. I mean, you can all kinds of speculative reasons why Christ took this gesture.
Mm-hmm.
Truth of the matter is, we don't know, right? We don't know, personally, I'm kind of partial to the he was writing down the sins of the accusers answer, But of course, it's all ultimately speculation because the text doesn't tell us.
There you go, Thomas. Appreciate your call. Carol is a first-time caller in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, watching us on EWTN television this afternoon. Carol, what's on your mind today? Carol in Greensburg, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, go right ahead. You're on the air.
I'm wondering, can my guardian angel take my prayers and my petitions to the saints and to God in heaven?
A short answer to the question is yes, absolutely. There are several passages in Scripture that say exactly that. When the archangel Raphael appears to Tobias and Sarah in the book of Tobit, he says that's exactly what he does, that his job is to take their prayers before the throne of God. In the book of Revelation chapter 5 and also Revelation 8, we see the same thing, that the saints in heaven, the angels in heaven, are depicted as offering our prayers to God. So can your angel act as an intermediary in prayer? The answer to the question is unambiguously yes.
All right. Hey, Carol, thanks so much for your call today. Agnes is a first-time caller in New York, also watching on EWTN television today. Hello, Agnes. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon. I'm a Catholic for the past 8 years. My birthday will be 11th of October. I was born a Catholic, and I would die a Catholic. Last week, I usually listen to the program every day, but I think it was Friday. They said the reason why when you pray and your prayer is not answered, I forgot what they said. Could you please tell me what I'm lacking of?
Okay, so I think the question is there anything lacking in your prayers if you do not receive what you have asked for?
That's correct.
And, I'm going to give you an answer that I heard from my very own pastor here in the Diocese of Birmingham. Well, I'm not in the diocese right now, but when I'm home in the Diocese of Birmingham.
Yeah.
And because I think it's so true to Catholic tradition, but so pithily said. He said, God has three answers to prayer. Yes, not yet, and I have a better plan. Right? And so there may be nothing lacking to your prayer, maybe nothing lacking at all. Except maybe perseverance, right? Ultimately, the real point of prayer, St. Augustine said, all prayer should take its shape, as it were, from the Lord's Prayer, which is entirely oriented towards seeking the glory of God, the necessities of daily life, and the conformity of our will to His. And so, the one prayer that's always answered is the faithful, contrite, persevering prayer for the graces necessary for our salvation. That's the prayer God will never say no to, right? The more our prayer confirms or conforms, I should say, to the will of God, the more likely we are to get what we ask.
Okay. Agnes, thanks so much for your call. Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. He is in Sioux City, Iowa today at the studios of Siouxland Catholic Radio. We thank everybody at Siouxland for hosting Dr. Anders. He'll be speaking there tonight locally, so if you're listening in the Sioux City area or anywhere that is served by Siouxland Catholic Radio, please support your Catholic radio station. Let's go now to Mike. Mike is a first-time caller in Akron, listening on Living Bread Radio. Mike, what's on your mind today, sir?
Well, thank you for taking my call. This has been on my mind for quite a while, and I'll see if I can get an answer. After life, is there an awareness of self? What happens to the soul, to our mind, our thoughts, our memories? Will our souls, our spirit, have a sense of consciousness, a sense of awareness? Some say that our souls will be comatose, in a comatose state, until we're reunited with our bodies. My question is, after death, immediately after death, if that is the case, until we're reunited with our bodies, what happens to our soul? Do we have an awareness? Do we have a consciousness?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the question. So there's actually a dogmatic answer to this. This is not just a matter of theological speculation. There was a debate about this issue in the 14th century, and Pope Benedict XII actually published an infallible declaration in a papal bull entitled Benedictus Deus, when he defined the dogma that the souls of the just necessarily see God in the beatific vision immediately upon death. That's conscious existence. And of course, the doctrine of purgatory also implies a conscious experience. So the consciousness of the souls in death is a dogma of the Catholic faith. Now, I think it's fair to say that the consciousness of the separated soul will be very different from the consciousness of the soul on earth, because we will lack all of the material medium of consciousness. Right now, the information I gather is through sensible awareness, and I use my brain to generate consciousness. That won't be the case in the next life. And so actually Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica has an extended discussion on the nature of angelic consciousness and the consciousness of separated souls. And I won't go into all the details because it's pedantic scholastic philosophy, but if you're interested, you can go read it. And it will be different. It will be different, but it will be a kind of consciousness, but not like the one we have right now. Until, of course, we receive the resurrected bodies, and then presumably they'll be like Christ's resurrected body, so it'll be better than what we have now, but there will be another form of embodied cognition.
Okay. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for your call. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Springfield, Illinois. Russ is a first-time caller watching on EWTN television. Hello, Russ. What's on your mind today, sir?
Yes, I was just wondering about the protocol of the Sacrament of Penance. It's changed considerably for the better over from the 1st century to the 7th or 8th century, and that's what we're dealing with today. However, being in the 21st century, I'm just wondering if, in fact, the lead form of contrition that we say at the beginning of the Mass will eventually be something that will supplant the current form.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So the Sacrament of Penance, the essential matter of the Sacrament of Penance has not changed at all over the centuries. It's contrition and confession of sin, absolution, and penance. And that has always been the case. Now, what has changed is, well, the forum has changed. So in antiquity, all those things would take place in a public context. In the Middle Ages, the Church allowed for, in fact, mandated the private confession of sins. And, of course, the formula of absolution has been tinkered with over the years, and confessional manuals throughout the centuries. You know, the kind of examination of conscience that people do has changed a little bit because of time and circumstance. One of the funniest things I ever read in my life when I was doing my own studies in medieval spirituality, I remember reading a medieval confessional manual. This is a guide for priests who are hearing confessions on what to say when a penitent comes in with a particular problem. Mm-hmm. And I kid you not, this was a real issue. So the confession, the manual said, what do you say when a penitent comes in and confesses that he had a mouse in his beer?
Wow.
I think I've been to confession a lot of times. I've never confessed, mouse in beer.
I'm glad to hear that.
Or nor would I know why someone would think they needed to confess that. But apparently there were some tender consciences in the 9th century that were worried about, mice in beer, rodents in alcoholic beverages. So those kinds of things change, but the essential matter doesn't change. Now, as to your question with the Confiteor, the general confession of sin that we make in Mass, could that ever do double duty and take over the form of the sacrament? The answer to that question is no. And St. Augustine, way back in the 4th century, had a beautiful sermon to catechumens where he described the essential organization of the Church's penitential regime, and it's unchanged to this very day. There are those light sins, what we call venial sins, for which praying the Our Father or praying the Confiteor suffices, but they're the weightier matters that require penance and absolution that are reserved to the sacrament. Otherwise, why would Christ has given us the sacrament? The first thing he gave to the church after he rose from the dead, received the Holy Spirit, whose sins you forgive are forgiven, whose sins you retain are retained. It would be no sense in Christ giving that sacrament if he didn't intend for us to use it. And it's, of course, a great good for the church. And it would be, I've often said, if I only had one sacrament to be Catholic for, it would be the sacrament of confession, right? I think this is just the greatest gift.
It sure is. Russ, thanks so much for your call today. John, watching on Facebook, says, in Matthew 25, it says, "For I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink," etc., etc. As a Catholic, does this mean we should give money or something else to any panhandlers that we pass by? How should we address them? I'm never sure what to do, and I don't want to feed any harmful addictions.
Yeah, thanks. So Jesus also said, "Be as wise as a serpent and as innocent as a dove." Right. So you don't have to make yourself a target for manipulation. You don't have to be naive, and we're supposed to exercise genuine human prudence in all of our actions. So you don't get out of doing good to people. You have to do good. You have to be involved in the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, but you can be very prudent about how you exercise that ministry. So you don't have to hand money to every panhandler that you see. Now, if that's an area of human need that moves your heart considerably, you might say support your local food pantry or support your local homeless shelter or something like that. Most dioceses have a Department of Catholic Social Services that does an awful lot of work in that area. You might consider making an extra gift to Catholic Charities or Catholic Social Services in your diocese. And there are people who are tasked with seeing that those things are used in a prudent way.
There's something that my wife and I like to do. We always carry in our cars what we call Jesus bags, which include a bottle of water, some soft food, some crackers, and as well as a prayer card and a rosary, things of that sort. And just hand those out, if somebody comes up to our car at a street corner or something like that, and we're glad to do that because we know that it's not going to get abused.
Fantastic. Good idea.
Do appreciate that, and thanks so much for your call, all of your questions. Always great to talk with Dr. David Anders Monday through Friday on these stations. And today, right there in Sioux City, Iowa, David, safe travels to you. I know that you're off to Omaha, right?
Yep, after today, we're heading to Omaha.
Fantastic. We'll talk to you then, and thank you so much for all that you do. We do this program Monday through Friday here on EWTN, 2 p.m. Eastern for our live broadcast, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern, and that's, of course, 8 p.m. on the West Coast. Check out that podcast we were talking about earlier, EWTN.com/radio, and then click on the word podcasts. And because we carry those in alphabetical order, just scroll down a little bit. There it is, Call to Communion. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders in Sioux City. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow from Omaha here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.